Welcome parents to this quick training on grading and Mastery Connect, how mastery-based grading gives us more of what we want and less of what we don't. Now, before we jump into some of the details of our grading system, I did want you to understand the philosophy behind it, so we're going to start with some general ideas about grading. What does an A mean to you? It means different things to different people, but for most people it means that the student has mastered what they were supposed to in that course. That's what it ought to mean. They've demonstrated mastery of the standards of the course, but what about a few different things? Let's think about extra credit. When I was young, the teacher would say, oh, you didn't pass a test, here are some extra credit opportunities. Some of them would be related to what the test was about, but many of them would be something else. It's just a way to pad your grade in case you failed the test. What about participation grades? Participation is great. However, if a student participates, does that mean that they have mastery over the course material? Not necessarily. Completion grades. Again, completing work is good, but many teachers have a component of their grade that's simply about did the student do the work and turn it in? And as we know, that doesn't necessarily mean that the student understood the work. So all those three things put together could have a significant impact on a child's grades, but they don't necessarily reflect whether a student learned what they were supposed to learn. Instead, most of those three things demonstrate more if the student has been responsible. Then there's teachers. Some teachers we know hold very rigorous standards when it comes to grading, and some maybe are trying to liberate children from the oppression of grades. And what about averaging? Okay, here's a student who attempted something 3 times. Let's say that over the course of a unit there was 2 quizzes and a test. The first attempt they got a 33%. Second attempt they got a 69%, and the third attempt they got an 85%. It's very typical in a traditional grading system to average them, which would be 62%. But which of those numbers is the best representation of what the student has learned? Attempt 3 is the most recent example of their learning and shows where their learning is now. Why would we average in previous attempts? Even if we weight the test more heavily, we're still penalizing a student for something that they didn't know before that they apparently do know now. So, all of these factors have led to a couple of things which I don't think are good for kids. One is that grades are pretty much meaningless. Parents and children really don't know what they communicate. Was it that the child was responsible, or was it that the child actually mastered what they were supposed to in that course? And often grades are inflated. Because we've built in so many ways in a traditional system for students to raise grades, that can give parents a false sense of security that their child knows what they're supposed to know because they get good grades, but in fact they may not be where they need to be academically. So our board-approved grading policy is trying to solve some of the problems with traditional grading. The policy is that students should be graded individually based upon the mastery of our academic standards, which are coming from core knowledge and the Utah State Board of Education, rather than being earning points or being measured by the pace of their learning. So our academic course grades are not derived directly from scores on assignments, tests, quizzes, homework, makeup work, or extra credit assignments. It's based on what they can demonstrate mastery of through assessments. There's different types of assessment, but all of our grades are based on assessments of student learning, often using rubrics which clearly describe the levels of competency or mastery in each of our standards. So what these grades should do is communicate clearly. They should let you know if your child has demonstrated mastery of the core standards, and if they haven't, they should let you know where they need to work. So we measure mastery using a 4-point scale. The 3 is what we'll start with. That's mastery. That's the student's performance reaches the standard as described. A yellow or a 2 means that they're close to getting there, and the red, not yet, remediation, or 1 means they need significant improvement. Let's talk about the 4, the blue. That is if the student can apply the knowledge or skill in the standard or across the standard in a way that demonstrates deep conceptual understanding, a non-straightforward logical inference, outstanding creativity, or exceptional skill. I want to emphasize that green is good. Our standards are already high, so if a student has achieved mastery, then you can be satisfied. Some parents may always want to push their child to blue, but there may not always be an opportunity to achieve a blue level mastery in every standard, and it's simply not expected. It's really a way to recognize some occasional outstanding achievement, but it shouldn't be expected in every standard. So what are our standards? Well, we have defined our own standards. They include the most important measures for students to achieve in the grade level. We hope they include a description that you as a parent can understand. They're not filled with education jargon. and they should include a clear measurement of mastery. We don't use the state standards in a straightforward way. And the reason for that is that there are so many state standards, there's dozens and dozens of them. It makes a grade book really unwieldy and it's not very user-friendly. It can also lead to a type of instruction that we don't like, where teachers are teaching, splitting everything up into individual standards. They might take a great work of literature and they apply one standard to it each day, and it really kind of takes some of the love of learning away. So we really like to approach things in a more holistic way with more authentic assignments. We also think that the state standards are not designed to communicate to parents and to students. They're for educators. So we've reworded and we've condensed them into our own standards. So I'll give you an example here. Here are the state standards in English for kindergarten. It starts with reading literature, and there are 3 groups of 3. There's 9 standards there, plus a 10th. Then there's informational text. There's 9 standards here, plus a 10th. Foundational reading skills, standard 1 has 4 subpoints, standard 2 has 5 subpoints, and on and on and on and on. There are so many standards. What we've done is we've condensed them into bigger buckets. So for example, hearing sounds, we know this is a really important skill for kids to have before they can read effectively. They need to be able to hear the beginning, middle, and end sounds of words. So that's one standard. Reading fluency. Can the students read their sight words? We have condensed things into bigger buckets, and there's only 10 of them here in kindergarten reading. Now, what that looks like when we go to Mastery Connect, so I'll show you what the teacher side looks like. We've taken these 10 standards, and they become the columns that you see here. This is what the teacher gradebook looks like. It's got the 10 standards across the top, and the student names are listed there on the left. This gives teachers a really clear and quick view of student mastery. So for hearing sounds, for example, she can see that there's 4 students who aren't quite there yet, who need some additional practice. What it looks like when we click on a student is we can see for that student exactly where they're demonstrating mastery and where they're not. So far in this course, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 standards have been assessed so far. The student, you can see here on the right, this gives you the overall view. 63% of the standards are in mastery. So some of those are blue, 38%. Some of them are in green, 25%. And then the rest of them are not in mastery yet. There's still a standard the teacher hasn't assessed yet, so that's taken into consideration here. Now, when you log on as a parent, we're going to take a look at what that is. So you go to masteryconnect.com. There's a login button here at the top. I'm going to use a fake parent account. Typically, we'll start here at home. There are going to be 8 current classes. There are 4 core classes and there are 4 specials classes. In this dummy account, it's just 1, just so that you can see what it looks like. So we've got math here. On the right, you're going to see 1 bar that represents the level of mastery of your student. So for Victoria here, she's demonstrated mastery of most of the standards that have been assessed so far, which is only 16%. If we click into math, we'll get a more detailed view. This is again what many schools just use the state standards. As you can see, there's many of them. That's one of the reasons we don't use them straightforwardly. In our grading books, you should see titles here that hopefully make more sense. If you click in, you'll be able to see the assessments that the student has taken to show whether or not they've mastered the standard. So Victoria has taken 4 assessments. These are chronological. So the first one, she got 0 out of 2. Then she got 8 out of 12, then she got 5 out of 5. You can see her mastery level increasing. The B in this case is a benchmark, which is not affecting the grade, and we don't typically do that. You'll notice that she has a green in this standard, even though she used to have a red and a yellow. That's because we only count the most recent attempt at mastery. Going down, we can see that she has 2 out of 3, so she's only taken 1 assessment so far in this standard, and she's gotten 2 out of 3, so she's in nearing mastery. Often you can click on this and it will show you the assessment itself, so you can see the exact types of questions that your child is being asked. Those aren't always available, but you can click and see, and many times the assessment will be right there for you to see. It also has a drop down to show you the standard in a little bit more detail. So this is the view that you can see in any of the courses that your child is enrolled in. Some advantages to how we do it. First, it should direct the focus squarely on student learning. It's really not about have they completed tasks, it's about have they learned what they're supposed to learn. That means that we don't have these artificial timelines for learning. In a typical school, when the term is over, it's over and it's too late. If you didn't master that last unit test, well, we've got to move on to going on to the next term. Although our curriculum is still pacing across the terms, students can come back if they've had chances to practice and they can demonstrate mastery a little later. They failed a test in October, they can go back in January, February. They've had more exposure, they've been using that concept in class, and they can try it again. There are a couple of exceptions. We don't always use the most recent score. For example, in spelling, we can't have students failing every spelling test in the year and then passing the last one and getting 100%. Spelling is something where it's divvied up into small chunks that all come together to show whether the student has mastered it or not. So there's only a couple of examples like that where students they can't just take the most recent score, they have to demonstrate mastery over the course of the school year. But for the most part, it's just the most recent attempt at mastery, and you can keep trying throughout the school year. That means they're not penalized if they failed earlier. I think this contributes to the students' motivation and their growth mindset that we can always keep trying and learning. At least in the school year, we have time to demonstrate mastery. This also gives you and your students just more accurate information about where they are. So a couple of cautions with mastery grading. One is because the timeline is not as strict, we've seen a few cases where students will wait until the end of the year thinking, well, I can always retake an assessment. And of course, that's just not true, right? It takes time sometimes to develop mastery as concepts are building. So as a parent, we just want you to be aware that you really need to keep on top of things as the year goes. Just because they can retake a test later in the year doesn't mean that they can put it off. We also Teachers sometimes require students to show that they have studied and completed a packet or completed homework problems before they retake an assessment. You can imagine it can be quite a logistical challenge and a burden on teachers to constantly be giving retake assessments. So they may require the student to do some work before they retake the assessment. So students really, they can't put it off. They need to make sure they're still working throughout the year. There are a few things that also just require a lot of repetition to develop true mastery. So for example, in math, if a student has demonstrated mastery once, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have it mastered forever. There's value in doing extra practice with math problems. There's value in doing nightly reading, just continuing to grow as a reader. So teachers may occasionally require something like a nightly reading log that doesn't translate directly to a mastery assessment, but we know it's important for the student to develop mastery. Now, how does this translate to a traditional grading scale? First of all, I should say that Mastery Connect is our grade book. Okay, that is our grading scale, and we don't really have a traditional scale, except that some schools do require a traditional grade transcript. They don't accept a mastery grading report. So every 9 weeks, teachers will translate mastery levels into a numerical grade and put it on Compass. They do this by taking the number of standards that your student has mastered and dividing it by the number of standards that have been taught so far. So for example, if your student has mastered 8 standards and 10 have been taught so far, that's 8 out of 10, which is 80%. This score is updated as the year progresses. So by the end of the year, a student has demonstrated mastery of all the standards. They would be 100% on the transcript, and that 100% would replace any previous grades. The 80% would go away, a 60% would go away, and would just show 100% across. So it looks a little bit strange, but it's consistent with our philosophy. Important for parents to know that we don't practice social promotion. Social promotion is the practice that many schools do of advancing students to the next grade level, whether or not they've demonstrated mastery of that grade level, those grade level standards. That's because they think self-esteem or social considerations are more important than academic considerations. However, our charter as a college prep school, we're really focused on the academics, and we can't practice social promotion, so students need to demonstrate mastery before advancing to the next grade level. What that looks like specifically is that students are retained, they repeat the grade level if they fail, and failing means that they've demonstrated mastery of fewer than 60% of the standards. So if they fail 2 or more core classes, which is math, English, history, and science, or 3 or more specials classes, music, art, PE, Chinese. We hope this doesn't give you the impression that we don't value our specials. We absolutely do. That's an incredibly important part of our charter. However, we know that students sometimes, especially those who transfer from different schools, will have no background in Chinese or music performance. It might be more difficult for them to catch up, whereas all schools teach math, English, history, and science. So there's just a little bit more leniency with our specials classes, or it can be a combination of one core class and 2 specials classes. So what can you do as a parent? Just make sure you keep your eye on your students' grades. Log into Mastery Connect every now and then, or make an appointment on your calendar every week. I'm just going to check and see if there's any yellows or reds there. If you see those yellows and reds, you can talk to your child about it. Or if you have questions, talk to your child's teacher. If you have concerns or you want to know what you can do to help them improve, then reach out to your child's teacher. They're the first line of communication. If you have any trouble logging in, you can always have your student log in. If they use this web address, if they do it on their Chromebook or using their student Google account, it'll take them straight into Mastery Connect, and it will also take them into almost any of the other programs that we use here. So your student can show you all of his or her grades. You can email me if your email address is not connected to your children's Mastery Connect account. I'd be happy to put that in there. It should be syncing automatically with what you have in our system, but there's occasionally an issue, so just email me and let me know. So thank you so much for joining me for this training. We know that with your cooperation and focused on mastery that we can do some amazing things for kids, and we really appreciate your time.